Hello, my name is David Modler. I'm an artist, scholar, and professor, originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I currently live in Rockville. I'm also an associate professor of art in the Department of Contemporary Art and Theater at Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. At Shepherd, I coordinate the art education program, and I also teach within the foundations program, primarily teaching in the visual thinking, 2D design coursework, drawing, and printmaking. I also have been working at the Delaplaine for about the last 3 years or so. I've developed adult workshops, working with the visual journal, working with experimental drawing techniques, and then also some other courses with mixed media, painting and collage applications for process. All those things part of my studio practice as well. So also I've been developing camps, so I teach summer camps there with kids in the summer, everything from printmaking to drawing to journals to artist trading cards to ceramics. Just do a wide range of activities with kids in the summer. My purposes here are as I'm working on a series of instructional videos for the Delaplaine on basic studio practices for a visual journal. And so whether you have already been keeping a visual journal and you're just looking for some things to help you maintain your practice, these videos may be helpful for that. Or if you've been interested in this pandemic and this world of self-isolation, looking for an outlet for some creativity, a visual journal could be a nice tool for you to have some studio practice within your home without needing a lot of materials. So I already did one video which was just on basic watercolor applications, and in that video I talked about watercolor washes, mixing and blending watercolor paint to start pages, get some layers started in the pages. My idea is that these videos will build upon themselves, and that if you watch them in a series, you sort of start to build some layers with your work. So today I'm going to focus on some experimental applications for watercolor paint, particularly working with bubble wrap, salt, and rubbing alcohol as ways to work with the paint in ways other than just using a brush alone and getting pages started in your book. So I'll show you some examples of that and also some demos. So you can see I've got my journal out here, and I also have the materials that I'm going to need for this demo. So I have my watercolor paints. Any kind of watercolor paints that you have will work fine. I have a little bit of salt. I have a piece of bubble wrap, and I think probably like me, we're ordering lots more things online these days. Being stuck at home, you probably have some bubble wrap, and then also some water. And I do have a brush just to use to apply the paint for these various techniques. So the first one I want to show you is just working with the bubble wrap. It can work as a basic printing matrix in a way, and there's a couple of different ways that you can use it. So first off, just on a white sheet of paper, I'm just going to get some paint that I want, and just like we did with the watercolor washes, just make sure you're loading the brush with plenty of water so that you'll get plenty of paint to spread onto the plastic. As you can see in the video, the paint isn't necessarily covering the entire surface, but I guarantee you enough water and paint is getting onto this plastic to create an effective print. And I made a piece that's a little bit smaller. You could cut a piece that's the same size as the entire page of your book, or half page, quarter size, whatever size you need. You can cut that bubble wrap down to for your needs. So I'm just going to use this red paint, cover this entire section. Again, plenty of water. You could even blend paints into this if you wanted different colors. I'm just going to stick with this red. And then the process is simply to take this, turn it over, and then press it down onto the page. This is where you have some options with what you choose to do. I could leave this piece of plastic here and let this dry, and if I did that, these little circles that are being, the polka dot pattern that's being created, would become a little bit more permanent. What I could also do is choose to just use it as a printing process, pick it up. You can see that these bubbles are still fairly wet, and I could just print with it again. So it just depends on whether you're just trying to get some color on the page, or if you really want those dots to show up. And I could probably add more paint, and then I could do another layer here at the bottom as well if I wanted to. So think about using that bubble wrap. You can use it as a printing technique. You can change up the colors and build up layers. I did do a page here in my book that I want to show you where I have worked with some of the bubble wrap and actually did it on top of one of the pages that I did in my video with the watercolor wash. So I'd done a blue watercolor wash, and I took this piece of bubble wrap and I painted it with a magenta color and then layered it on top, so you can see how it looks when you allow it to sit on the page and dry. So a couple different ways that you can work with that bubble wrap and get some different effects. Another technique I want to show you today is working with the watercolor paint and salt. So just basic table salt works. If you want the process to be a little thicker, chunkier, you can use like a thicker kosher salt. That might be a little bit more coarse. That can work. This process starts out just like one of the basic watercolor washes or mixing and blending processes. You need to get a nice layer of paint on the paper in the area where you want to use the salt. It works really good as a background, just like a watercolor wash. It's just a way that you can play around with the watercolor wash a little bit more and texturize it. So I'm going to get plenty of water. I also find that working with the salt works best with darker colors. So I like to get a nice, wet, dark, juicy color down and on the page. I'm just going to work in this corner for the purposes of this video. Get this corner sort of loaded up, and then you just take the salt, sprinkle it into that area. And I'm sure there's a real complicated science behind this that I can guarantee you I don't know, but there is something about salt, and we know that from living in this area in the wintertime. If you throw the salt down on ice or on the snow, it's going to sort of soak up the moisture, so it's easier to crack up the ice and sort of melt it. So there's some sort of process similar to that that's occurring here. The salt crystals are soaking up the pigment and the water. And what that will do, and I have a page where I already did some of this, what that will do is create a crystallizing sort of effect on the paper. So this page, I did it before this video started. I've allowed it to dry, so all I have to do is wipe the salt off of the page. And then you can see that in those areas where the salt crystals were, you can sort of see that speckling or that crystallization of that area, adding an interesting texture to that page. So as you're continuing to experiment with watercolor paint, in addition to those processes of wash, color mixing, blending, try working with the bubble wrap as a way to apply the paint other than just the brush. Maybe after you've applied the paint with the brush, maybe some salt plays into it. And then another technique, another effect that you can create is working with rubbing alcohol. And because of the pandemic, went to 3 different stores. I can't find any rubbing alcohol and don't have any here in the house. So I would recommend, if you do have some, to give it a try. But what I do have is I do have a page here in my journal where I have worked with some of the rubbing alcohol and the paint. So there on that part of the page, I've painted with purple, blue, and some indigo paints. And then while the paint was still wet, I used an eyedropper and I dropped some of the rubbing alcohol into the watercolor paint. And if you look carefully, you can kind of see this sort of effect that occurs from that rubbing alcohol. Of course, then, like all the work I do in my journals, other layers of things have built up on top of that, because I'm really thinking about this watercolor application, even when working with the rubbing alcohol, just as as a way to get a page started with full intention that I'm going to build that layer up over time. Down here at the bottom of this page, you can see an area where I worked with some of the salt that has dried. So you can see that a little bit close up and take another look at that technique there. So what I'd encourage you to do is to continue working in your journal. I'm gonna move my phone back up here so you can see me. Continue working in your journal. Think about not only working with the watercolor paint to color a page or change the color from just this blank white page to something happening. And as I said in the first video, and I'll repeat here, that tends to give you something to respond to in your work. Think about working with some of these other materials. Think about taking some of that bubble wrap that all this stuff is coming in that you're ordering, and cut some of it up and put some watercolor paint on it and try printing with it and see what sorts of effects you can get. I'm sure you've got some salt at home. Paint a nice, dark, wet, juicy space in an area of a page. Sprinkle some of that salt into it and allow it to dry. Once it's dry, wipe it off and you'll see that effect that you get, that kind of crystallizing of the color on that page. And then if you're lucky and you haven't used up all of your rubbing alcohol yet, you can try working with rubbing alcohol and adding that to the paint as well. Once again, it's painting a nice dark color. The way I describe it is just dark, wet, juicy, just a really dark color. And then either with an eyedropper, you can even just use a brush, just dip the brush into the rubbing alcohol and sort of blot it, and it'll sort of sprinkle some of that rubbing alcohol into the paint, and you'll sort of see how it, when it makes contact with the paint, how it dissipates. And then allowing it to dry, you get these interesting layers. You might notice when you work with the rubbing alcohol that it looks like it stains through the page. Don't worry about that. Once it dries and the rubbing alcohol sort of evaporates, you can easily work right back over top of it, so it doesn't create like permanent damage or anything to the paper. So hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm going to keep working on these. I've got idea for 5 different ones. This is just part 2. And keep journaling and take good care, and I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.